causal factors that play a role in developing obesity, and we looked at some numbers that indicate how that problem is developing and at the moment seems to be going the wrong way for us. Okay, so let's look at the different kinds of fat deposits, because where you put the fat down plays a role in how much risk you're in. Right? So everybody has lots of fat cells. Even if you're really lean, we carry tons of fat cells. So what we're looking at is where are those laid down, and if I'm getting overweight or if I'm obese, what's worse than something else. So here we're looking at if the fat deposit is around the stomach. All right, so if it's belly fat, and that's called central android or visceral obesity, and creates what they call an apple shape. So round in the middle. Right? What the research indicates is that fat deposits in that area put you at more risk of developing coronary artery disease, hypertension, diabetes, and other similar diseases. Because what they're finding is that fat cells in that area seem to release increased levels of free fatty acids into the bloodstream. And those free fatty acids then can cause plaques and blockages, and that's why we see some problems. If the fat deposits are around the glute, the butt, the thighs, then that is called pear-shaped, and you'll sometimes see it as peripheral or gynoid. Occasionally you'll see it as subcutaneous, although subcutaneous is really any fat that's under the skin. All right? Visceral fat is any fat that's in your trunk wrapped around your organs. So peripheral gynoid, pear-shaped, where the majority of my additional fat deposit is lower down in the body, is safer somehow, less dangerous than this central scenario. All right, these fat deposits don't release as much free fatty acids into the bloodstream. It just sits there. Okay. So I mentioned very briefly the other day waist to hip ratio, and this is really what we're looking at here. When you include waist to hip ratio as a measure, then you get, it's a ratio, so 1 is the highest, 0 is the lowest. You never get 0, really. But if I measure waist and I measure hip and I calculate that ratio, greater than 0.95 for a woman, for a man, sorry, and greater than 0.8 for a woman, leads to increased risk for cardiovascular disease and sudden death. All right, so if you think about it, that means that for the closer your waist and your hips are in measurement, if you're a guy, right, we want those close. I don't want a great big wide waist and really narrow hips, because that's not how we're built. That's indicative of a problem. Okay? For a girl, typically our hips are bigger than our waist anyway. Right? Most girls have somewhat wider hips than waist, so they allow for that when they're looking at the risk factor. All right? So if my hips are here and my waist is here, now I've got a problem. Right? right? So we're always looking, the waist should be smaller or equal to the hips, depending on whether I'm male or female. If the waist is larger, the waist girth is larger than the hips, then your risk is much higher. Okay? Now, when we lay down these additional fat cells, when you look at someone who is overweight, but particularly when we're looking at obesity, then we've got one of two ways of that happening. Either I can add more fat storage into the cells that are already there, right? We all have fat cells, so I can add more fat into the cell. They work a little bit, if you've been in 212, remember they work a little bit like a balloon, right? So I can pour the fat in, I can pour it out, they stretch a little bit, they get bigger, they can shrink. So hypertrophy, adding more fat into a cell that's already there, would give me a higher percentage of fat mass. Or I can add additional cells, hyperplasia, I can actually add extra fat cells and then use those for storage. All right? That would increase my body fat percentage. What we find is that with people who are obese or moderately obese tend to have their fat storage as number A, right? They haven't laid down extra fat cells, they've just got a lot of fat in the cells they have. With people who are extremely obese, what you start to see is they actually add additional fat cells. Well, that's quite hard work for your body. It takes quite a lot of energy to lay down additional cells. It's much easier to fill up the ones that are already there. So if we're at the point where we're laying down new ones, that's really pretty problematical. And so what they see is that people who are extremely obese may have as many as 3 times more fat cells as a normal average kind of measure. So on average, they estimate somewhere around 25 billion for someone who's average. So 3 times that is possible for someone who's extremely obese. So I said Wednesday, this picture's highly complicated, right? It's not just as simple as saying, well, move more, eat less. Fat cells, remember, don't go away once they're there. So once we've laid them down, if I'm laying down, if I'm extremely obese, and I've laid down all these additional cells, now we get to another problem, because now losing weight is tricky. I might be able to lose some weight, but keeping it off becomes very problematical. Maintaining the weight loss is hard work because I've got all these extra storage units sitting there waiting to be filled up again. Okay, yes, Sarah?
So hypertrophy is filling out the fat cell, hyperplasia is adding fat cells.
Yes. Yeah. All right, so hyperplastic cells, additional cells, don't go away once we've laid them down, and so then they're just kind of hanging around, waiting for you to overeat a little bit and put some calories back into them again. So it becomes really, really difficult to maintain any weight loss. It's an entire lifestyle change. You can't just diet for a little while or exercise for a little while, because as soon as you stop, that's going to go back. That's what the research says. Even when you look at overweight people, generally they yo-yo, right? We go on a diet, we lose weight, we get a bit sloppy with our diet, we put the weight back on, then we go on another diet, we lose weight again, we get sloppy, we put it back on, right? It's constant. The only thing that works is change the lifestyle. Okay? So again, that's where you guys have to come in, because you're going to be the people to help people change their lifestyle. Because that's ultimately what we have to do. composition and performance. So we're looking at skill sets, right? Then it's relatively, I think, easy for you to get the hang of the idea that if I have a higher percentage body fat, but I've got the same fat-free mass as someone else, then I'm going to be at a disadvantage, particularly when we're looking at movement skills that involve air time. So running, jumping, I'm at less disadvantage if I'm throwing, right? Or swimming, biking to some extent, right? But anywhere where I have to lift myself off the ground, because I will have a higher total body mass, I have to work harder, I have to use more energy to do the same job, right? And I'm not going to be able to create, if I've got the same fat-free mass as someone else, I'm not going to be stronger to overcome that additional total body mass. We also see decrease in relative peak oxygen consumption because my absolute measure is getting divided by a higher total body mass. So if I'm comparing myself to someone else, my VO2 max would be lower. Having greater fat-free mass, on the other hand, can be an advantage, depends on the skill that we're looking at, right? But for strength events, a higher fat-free mass is very beneficial. So depending on what kind of athlete you are, building muscle can be an advantage. In some events, it's going to slow you down because muscle weighs so much, right? Tennis players often play around with trying to put on more muscle mass. In the women's game right now, everybody's running to try to even stay behind Serena and not further behind Serena, right? And she's super strong. So oftentimes you see them play around with trying to put on a little bit more muscle mass to be a bit stronger to see if they can keep up with hitting with her. But then what you see is they tend to lose points if she runs them side to side or forward backwards because they slow down. So it depends on what the event is. When you look at the literature, it's a little bit, one of the frustrating things you'll find with exercise physiology is it's out of all the sciences in PE and movement, X-Phys is the one that is moving the fastest right now. We are learning so much, and so a lot of the times we don't quite have the whole picture yet. So for example, when they run fitness tests, so like we're doing in lab, right? When they run those kinds of tests, what you see is a pretty decent negative correlation between body fat percentage and performance on the test. But when they start looking at a competition or a game, the correlation gets a lot smaller. We don't see quite the same. Well, there's a lot more mental stuff going on in a game than there is in a test. So there are other things that come into play when you look at the performance in an actual game versus a fitness test. So it's quite interesting when you look at the data. Really depends what measure of body composition are you taking, how are you taking it, right? Are you looking at percentage fat? Are you looking at fat-free mass? Are you using skin fold calipers? Are you using a bod pod? And what is the thing that you're testing? So the literature is a little bit equivocal right now. So if you have a look at table 12.1 in your books, which is on page 352, that table and table 12.2 on the next page give you some idea. So if you, 12.1, they're looking at American football players. And if you look at the percentage fat, you see that there's a pretty strong correlation between the performance, the score that they got in the test, and percentage fat. So the higher the fat, the lower their 9.1 meter sprint, 6-second sprint time, right? The higher their percentage fat, the lower their 36.5 meter sprint time. But when I look at bench press, the higher their body fat percentage, there's no correlation to their bench press. Because in the bench press, my fat I am doesn't make a lot of difference to how much weight I can push. Right? Because I'm not having to move my body. So it really depends on the test that you're looking at as to what you're going to see there. Okay? So be critical, pay attention when you're reading the literature, because those kinds of things make a big difference. Don't just read if the conclusion says, oh, it doesn't matter how fat you are. You need to go back and see why they got that conclusion, because that would be a little bit odd for most of us to think about. Okay? Then some verbiage that you will come back to in lab, but there's a difference between body composition and body size. All right? Size is typically when they talk about body size, we're talking about total body mass and height, typically, all right? And you measure body size using anthropometric measures, which we'll do during the semester in lab. So you'll measure your wrist girth, you'll measure your knee width, right? How big are your bones? That's not the same as how much fat do you have and how much muscle do you have, right? So it can be quite interesting when you start looking at the anthropometry measures, because I don't have any control over my bones. If I've got big, wide, heavy, dense bones, and my goal is to be 95 pounds, it might not matter how thin I get, I may never get to 95 pounds because I've got this great big skeleton I'm lugging around. Right? So it's quite an interesting eye-opener, I think, when you start taking those measures on yourself. So composition and size aren't the same, and generally, especially when we're looking at competitive sport, it's interesting to see how those combine to create someone who's good at a particular sport or a particular position in a sport. Naima's great at what he does, but he's not a quarterback. Doesn't look like a quarterback. Right? And a quarterback wouldn't be any good at doing Naima's job. Okay? So percentage body fats. I want to change my body composition. Remember we said pre-post. First thing is I have to know what my body composition is right now. So I would have to measure body composition ahead of time. And when we look at percentage body fats, we want to pay attention to who am I, what am I trying to do, what's the goal, right? And there's a guideline here as to what is the minimum percentage body fat an individual needs to function, okay? So for men, minimum, absolute minimum, somewhere around 3 to 5%. That's really, really, really low. Really low. All right, 3 to 5% means you're basically seeing all the muscle contracting and moving through the skin. You'll be able to see a lot of the lymph nodes and the veins, right? Really low is 3 to 5%. For women, 12 to 14% is the recommended minimum, because girls are supposed to have more fat than boys. It's a blow, but that's just the way it is, right? We don't have that choice. That's just how it's meant to be. So when you see female athletes who are down around 10%, long distance runners often go below the guideline. I was at college with a girl who was on the Olympic marathon team, and she was only around 9%. She got hurt and sick all the time, because that's not, women's bodies aren't supposed to have that lower fat content, all right? So when you are working with female athletes, make sure they're not setting ridiculous body fat, right? If you measure them and you say, oh, you're 19% body fat, and they turn around and go, oh, I'm going to be 10% by the end of the year. Ooh, let's have a conversation about that goal. That's really not a good plan, all right? So lean athletes, somewhere between 6 to 13, depending upon what the event is, right? What's their job? For women, 16 to 20. If I'm looking at non-athletes but people who are healthy, then somewhere around 14 to 17 for men, 21 to 24 for women, right? So unhealthy, once we start getting above that, you would be starting to be considered less healthy. And obesity, remember we looked at BMI. To be classified as obese on BMI is greater than or equal to 30, because you come out with a flat number. When we're looking at percentage body fat, it's greater than 25% for a man, greater than 32% for a woman. All right. Be a little careful with these kinds of classifications, though. All right, because being overweight, not obese, obese is a different category, but being overweight doesn't always mean that you're unhealthy. And in fact, there is some literature out there. So anything too low is unhealthy. You are at increased risk of disease and early mortality. Right? So really, really, really thin people put themselves at risk of dying young, or at least younger than they should. Right? Really, really, really extremely obese people are clearly unhealthy and have much, much greater risks of mortality and disease. When you look at healthy versus overweight, the line gets a little blurred, all right? There's actually some literature out there that says people who are overweight have less disease and less risk than people who are healthy weight. Why? I don't know. It's going to be really interesting. This stuff is developing very quickly because of the problem. There's a lot of research going on overweight and obese. They do look at if you have an obese person whose cardiovascular fitness is reasonable. So if I put that person on a bike or in a swimming pool and I improve their cardiovascular fitness, that person's outcomes are likely to be better than someone who is at a healthy weight but is sedentary and doesn't do any aerobic work. Right? So an aerobically fit obese person is healthier than an aerobically unfit lean person. Right? That's part of why I picked the guideline I picked for your project. Because when we look at the data, that cardiovascular fitness, that aerobic work that you may or may not do as an athlete right now, becomes really, really important to long-term health outcomes. So I want you to kind of wake up, let's see some light bulbs go off now about, oh my Lord, I do absolutely no aerobic work. How can I change this? Because when you leave school and you're not competing anymore, it's important that you have a strong cardiovascular element to your workout program. And I wish someone had told me that when I was your age, because I didn't learn that until I was 30. Right? So, BMI, not the same as percentage body fat, right? But so my preference is percentage body fat, because this tells me someone is too high in percentage body fat and they've got not enough muscle mass, or they've got lots and lots of muscle and that's why they're heavy on the scale. Right? Remember, BMI is only looking at height and weight. So it doesn't give you an accurate picture of what that weight is composed of. Page 354 in your book, they've got some more BMI classifications and predictions for health risk. So it's just another piece of information. If you're faced with BMI numbers, what do they really mean when we're looking at health risk? Question. Okay. All right. So either for yourself or for someone you know or for a client or for one of your athletes, they or you have a goal of changing body composition. All right, so what is that really going to involve? And how do I go about changing my body composition? I've measured it, that's not what I want, I'm going to change it. I want lower body fat percentage, or I want higher fat-free mass. So let's look at how do we go about doing that. So which one has the most calories? Okay. Nice big juicy apple. 0 fat banana muffin or low fat banana muffin. Which has more calories, the nice big juicy apple or the low fat banana muffin? Fat-free. Let's say it's a fat-free banana muffin. Muffin has more calories?
I don't know.
Who's voting for the muffin? Who's voting for the apple?
Oh, same.
Apple? Oh, both, okay. Muffin?
Yeah.
Both the same. Okay. All right. So the apple is going to be somewhere around 75 to 80 calories, depending on the type of apple, you know, which, is it an apple that has a lot, is it a very sweet type, or is it a very tart type of apple, is it massive, is it, right, somewhere around 75, 80 calories. The fat-free muffin is going to be somewhere around 250 to 300 calories, right? So this is not a good snack, okay? Plus, I'm not a nutritionist, but I'm going to say, plus, what they put in that to make it taste good because it's fat-free, you should not be putting in your body. Right? Think about that. If you're going to eat the muffin, eat a real muffin, enjoy it, and then come and do some more work. Okay? Don't eat fat-free rubbish. Don't eat diet, don't drink diet soda. There is nothing healthy about diet anything. If it was supposed to be diet, Mother Nature would have made it diet. That's why water has no calories, right? So you got a diet version, don't drink Diet Coke. Drink the real Coke and clean your teeth. Okay, off my soapbox. Energy balance then. So what we're looking at, if we take the simplistic version of what's going on, right, is trying to find or change energy balance. All right, and we can represent energy balance using just a simple seesaw. Okay? So this side we have my exercise. Over here I have my food. And my drinks. My red wine. Okay. So the ratio of how many calories, and when you're reading, so when we say calorie in everyday language, really what we are saying is calorie with a capital C, and you don't always hear it that way, right? It's a calorie, or it should be, if we're going small, should be kilocalorie. Right? We tend to be lazy when we're talking about calories, and we say calories instead of kilocalories. But when you're looking at it, that's the distinction. So, what's this seesaw? Okay, what's the ratio of how many calories I use a day versus how many calories I take in a day? Right? So, what we see is that if I put more calories out on this side than I take in here, you lose body mass. No, I didn't say fat. You lose body mass. Depends what you're doing as to what mass is. Okay. If I don't do very much, but I put loads of calories in, I gain body mass. So if I want to maintain my weight, my body mass, I have to balance these out. If I want to change it, I've got to tip the seesaw. Right. On this side, the calories, on this side, the calories that are going out are made up of resting metabolic rate, basal metabolic rate. So if I am lying flat on my bed doing absolutely nothing, how many calories does it take to keep my brain alive, for my heart to beat, for my digestive system to work, to stay warm? Right? All those kinds of jobs take energy, and a calorie is just a measure of energy. So how much energy does it take to do nothing? Okay? Depends on how big you are, how much muscle you have, all kinds of things. Okay? So for me, probably somewhere around 12 to 1,400 calories. Right? Still just about have quite a lot of muscle mass. So 1,200, let's say, right? Then you've got TEM, which I don't put in here because it's only a tiny little portion, but TEM stands for thermal effect of a meal. So have you ever noticed when you eat something, you get a bit warmer, right? When you're freezing cold, if you have something to eat, you get a bit warmer. Because as you break down foodstuffs, you release heat. So that's a little bit of the energy used to break down the food. And the other major bit though is how much physical activity you do. So I burn calories brushing my teeth in the morning. I burn calories throwing the frisbee for the dog. I burn calories walking to school instead of driving to school. Right? I use calories walking to the club or going down the gym. Okay? So what's my basal metabolic rate? How many calories do I need to function, to survive? And how much energy do I need to do the other stuff I do? Right? That's this side. Over here, anything I eat, anything I drink that has any calorie value, any energy value whatsoever goes in this side. Okay? So, what I want, if I want to maintain mass, is this to balance out. I eat, drink, I absorb the same number of calories that I spend every day, right? Otherwise, I'm gaining weight or losing weight. So, athletes often have a problem maintaining weight in season, right? I hear many of you complain about the fact that it doesn't matter how much you eat, you're losing weight, and coach wants you to maintain weight, and you can't, because you can't eat any more than you're eating and you're still losing weight. Because they've got you doing so much running around that you can't eat enough calories to maintain weight. You start to lose weight, right? One of the few times where a protein shake or some kind of additional food shake supplement can be useful, because I don't want to lose weight in season. I just spent all that time off season putting all this extra muscle mass on, and now I start running around and it's all going away again, right? So maintaining weight can be a problem if I'm an athlete. Maintaining weight if I'm an office worker. So what if I'm a secretary and I get to work at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, I get maybe a 30, 40-minute lunch break, and I don't get to leave until 5 or 6 in the evening, and my entire day is spent sitting staring at a computer screen, typing in data. Very difficult to maintain body mass, because I have to eat. Okay? I have to eat, and I sit on my bum all day. So I can not eat very much, and I'd be okay. But most of us aren't very disciplined at not eating very much, because food is yummy, right? And we like it. Plus, it's boring as hell sitting at this computer all day, and what do we tend to do when we're bored? We snack, right? So it's very difficult, because now I've tipped the seesaw the other way. I'm not doing very much, but I'm putting in, I might not be putting in a lot of calories, but I'm probably putting in more calories than I'm doing. And so gradually, over time, I put on a pound. I think, oh, it's just a pound. I put on another pound, and that's just a couple of pounds. It doesn't matter. I put on another pound, and it's just, and before you know it, it's 10 pounds. Now it becomes a bit more work to get rid of it. Okay? So if I tip this seesaw by 100 calories a day, 100 calories, so if I create a deficit of 100 calories a day between what I do and what I eat, 100 calories a day, there's 365 days in a year. That's a lot of calories. That adds up to 10.5 pounds a year. 100 calories a day. How do I tip the scale by 100 calories? Right? I've got a couple of choices now, because I can do 100 calories more exercise, and leave my food exactly the same. Don't change anything. Or I can leave this exactly the same and decrease my calories by 100. Or, option 3, I can increase that by 50 and decrease that by 50. And I create a 100-calorie deficit. And I cut out 50 calories a day. 50 calories. It's not very much. An apple, half an apple. If I look at everything I eat in a day, is there anywhere where I could cut 50 calories a day? I don't know. Not me, because I'm not cutting anything out over here, right? All my effort is going on that. But that's a personal choice, because I like food. So I'm not willing, most of the time, to do anything over this side. But different people will make different choices. Okay. One of the things you've got to be careful of is that when I'm looking at this picture, that resting metabolic rate or basal metabolic rate, BMR, RMR, they're slightly different, but we tend to use them interchangeably. All right? That will change. If I change that, it affects this picture, right? Because it's the major calorie expenditure that you have going on. If you go on a very drastic calorie-restricted diet, resting metabolic rate goes down. This goes down. So, will I lose weight? Well, if I'm only eating 800 calories a day, oh yeah, almost certainly I'll lose weight, right? How long are you got? And while you're eating 800 calories a day, you'll be losing weight, you'll be very happy. This is going down, down, down. And then, how long can I keep up only eating 800 calories a day? Not very long. At some point, I'm going to go back to eating more food. Except now, this went down. So I go back to eating more food, and all the weight comes back on. Right? So really, really drastic, low calorie diets, complete waste of your time. Right? Really stay away with those. When we eat carbohydrates, so everybody's very keen on low carb diets, right? If I stop eating carbohydrate, I can lose 5 pounds by the end of the week. Oh yeah, sure. Because when I store carbohydrate, in order to store it in the muscle, it stores with a molecule of water. Water's quite heavy, right? Think about, you're all very good. You're getting into very good, healthy habits about walking around with your water bottle all the time. How much does the water bottle weigh at the start of the day versus how much does it weigh at the end of the day? Right? Water is heavy. So I store carbohydrate for use as a fuel with a water molecule. So of course, if I stop eating carbohydrate, I lose 5 pounds by the end of the week. Did I lose 5 pounds? No. What did I lose? Water weight. So as soon as I have a drink or as soon as I start eating carbohydrate, I put the weight back on. I didn't lose anything. Because when we lose, what we're really aiming for is to lose body fat. Well, I didn't do that. Right? So it's phony to think, if I've got to walk the red carpet in front of 600 million people worldwide in 6-inch heels and a very tight sheath dress, am I going to do anything I can to walk down in front of all those? Yes, of course. Right? Do I want to run a mile and a half without any carbohydrate? No. That's not pretty. That doesn't feel good at all. Right? So cutting carbohydrate is not the way to change body composition. Don't get sucked in by low carb diets. Right? They're only good in certain situations for short periods of time. Athletes, your book talks about looking for 1,200 to 1,600 calories is a good amount of calories to be taking in. That is not for an athlete, right? That's for a typical person, which you are not. So 1,600 calories is not going to be enough food for you. You're going to lose weight. All right, so our primary goal now, I'm trying to change body composition. Number one goal is stay healthy. In order to stay healthy, I have to maintain nutrient intake. I've got to have protein, I've got to have fat, I've got to have carbs, I've got to have vitamins and minerals. Got to, right? Otherwise, before you know it, you won't be very healthy. So the guidelines that are suggested to try to make sure, remember we said the other day that mostly when we say we want to lose weight, most of the time what we want to lose is fat mass, not muscle mass. We don't ever want to lose bone mass, right? So I want to keep my bones heavy and dense. I want to maintain muscle mass because that keeps me strong. And if I'm not an athlete, it improves quality of life. If I'm an athlete, obviously I want to be as strong as I can for the job I've got to do. So we don't want to lose muscle mass. So mostly we're looking at fat mass, right? So what do I do to make sure that the change on the scale is down to fat, not anything else, right? So some of the guidelines to try to help you think about that: always drink plenty of water so that you stay hydrated, okay? Make sensible fat choices. So, point one, no fat. No fat is not a sensible fat choice. Your body has to have fat. Remember the minimum fat, right? The minimum wasn't 0. You have to have fat in your body to function and be healthy. So, what fat choices am I going to make that would be healthy? So I'm going to choose avocado rather than fried chicken, right? I'm going to choose a baked potato over French fries. I'm going to choose olive oil over butter, maybe. Okay? What fat choices am I going to make? The option is not none. Minimize empty calories. Now, empty calories is a term they use for something that doesn't benefit you particularly, right? It has calorie value, but it doesn't give you anything. So, like an apple has calorie value, but I get vitamins, I get roughage that's good for my digestive system and my colon. It's good for me, right? Or I can suck on a lollipop. Tons of calories, doesn't do anything, right? So why bother eating it? Well, they taste good, so maybe I want to eat it. We get away with a lot of stuff when we're competing because you use so many calories, you can pretty much eat whatever you like and you don't put on any weight. When you finish competing, you have to change your habits because when you continue those habits, the picture gets very ugly very quickly. Right? But think about the lollipop. Think about the Coca-Cola. Right? Why do I drink it? What am I getting from it? Can I go without it? Can I swap it for something else? Not cut it out. All right? I am not an advocate of cutting anything out. Because as soon as you cut it out, you crave it like crazy. I mean, no. Right? Cutting it out is not the answer. Balance. Minimize. All right, we'll pick up here on Monday, try to finish chapter 12, although as usual I talk too much and we're a bit behind where we should be. So Monday I will probably go